joining us. So, going straight into it, tell us what is Pans and Pandas? Because a couple of years ago, I'd never even heard of it. And it's only through a chance conversation that you and I had quite a few years ago now, where we were discussing this and you introduced me to your wonderful organisation. But explain to everybody on the podcast what it is.
Thank you for inviting me and the lovely introduction. And yeah, if you haven't heard of Pans and Pandas, you're definitely not alone. So they are acronyms they've got long names. So PANS stands for Pediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome. And PANDAS stands for Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorders Associated with Streptococcal Infections. And in essence, these are medical conditions, proposed post-infectious neuroinflammatory conditions, and they affect the brain and cause sudden changes in behaviour and functioning. So PANDAS is always linked to a strep infection. So it's triggered by strep. So that might be strep throat or scarlet fever, for example, whereas PANS has got a much wider set of triggers. So for example, chickenpox, flu, pneumonia, COVID-19 in some cases. And the symptoms of these medical conditions are neuropsychiatric, and that means they affect mood, behaviour, and cognitive functions. And people always say, oh gosh, so much terminology. What actually is it? So, in really simple terms, following an infection, the child or young person usually gets better, and then they develop a proposed neuroinflammatory response that affects their brain, and they come out with this whole wide scope of symptoms, neuropsychiatric symptoms, and that's known colloquially as a flare. And some of the key symptoms can be obsessive compulsive behaviour, restricted eating, and tics. And I think the one other thing that's really important to share is that despite the P in PANS, which stands for pediatric, it's so confusing because actually PANS can affect anyone at any age. And whilst PANDAS is a pediatric diagnosis, we know that from some of our families, those symptoms don't automatically resolve at 16, 18, or even beyond.
Wow, I mean it's such an huge condition that actually is triggered by something that lots of children have in their childhood, isn't it? I mean, I know my children and they've had loads of tonsillitis, colds, strep throat, and it's just so is there anything that sort of preempts that inflammation, or does it's just random in its choice of how it progresses from the strep throat to the Pans and Pandas condition?
I think you bring up a really good point there, because we know that all children and young people get infections and strep throat and sometimes repeated bouts of strep throat. And I think, in short, the answer is we don't really know yet what causes it. So scientists suspect there may be genetic links. They suspect there's some environmental research factors influence it. But in essence, we need to do more research to find out why this is happening.
And so what does it look like in children and young people, and how does it present them how does it present in the classroom? What is the things that we can see in our children, or if you're a teacher or an educator and you can see children within your classroom, what are the signs? What are we looking out for? And what does it how does it present in children within the classroom?
And I wish, in answer to that question, I could give you a really nice, clear, and definitive answer. But the truth is, it's quite complicated and it
Yeah.
presents differently in all children and young people. But some key points to hold in mind are we're looking for multiple unexplained changes in that child or young person. So you might see those changes in behaviour and learning. So maybe a child who was previously thriving and managing perfectly fine, suddenly struggling with tasks that they could do before. If we think about in the classroom, sometimes we notice academic changes that are quite unusual. So handwriting can suddenly deteriorate and quite dramatically. Math skills can drastically drop, or perhaps reading becomes difficult. But I think the key to hold in mind is it represents a change for that individual child. We often see quite fluctuating performance, so children might be coping quite well and be quite able, and then they'll have a flare up, and all of those skills will kind of regress. And often everybody's standing around the child saying, "What, what has happened? What has happened for this child?" We might also see emotional dysregulation, but again, key thing, it represents a change in that particular child. So tearfulness or withdrawal. New onset sensory needs, again, unusual to have this out of the blue, seemingly. So you might have this sudden onset sensory processing difficult, how they tolerate noise, light, touch, smells, clothing, or busy environments.
Hello. Did you like that preview, that little snippet of our episodes on Access All Areas of SEND podcast? If you did, we've got full episodes available now on all major providers. So Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple, and we've even got a YouTube channel. So go and find us, Access All Areas of SEND podcast. You're missing out.